This is a Kousa dogwood tree. It's in the flower garden at Greenwich Park. And this is a Canson cherry tree. It's also in the flower garden at Greenwich Park. I composed the music you're hearing specifically for these trees as part of a collaboration between Trinity Laban and the Royal Parks to create a geolocated sound installation accessed via a smartphone app. This is an infinity cube. It's a bit bigger than the toys you normally see. It was created for a dance project by Irene Fiordolino. Irene asked me to produce sound for the project. The music you're hearing wasn't written for this project. I've dubbed the track I'd already made into footage of rehearsals. I didn't get to make any music for Irene's cube because on the 23rd of March 2020 the UK went into lockdown and everything stopped. Music and dance are art forms built on collaboration, interaction, co-presence. But how do you collaborate and interact when suddenly you're not allowed to leave your house, let alone meet anybody else in an enclosed space such as a theatre or concert venue? This is Alwyn Pritchard's Mouth. She's performing a piece I wrote for her called Clock Watching. Alwyn put out a call on social media asking composers to send her postcards, small scores which she'd then film herself in her bathroom performing. This was the first reaction to lockdown. Do something, do anything, something on your own, in your home. Like this track I recorded at home for the Linear Obsessional release Self-Isolating Compilation, an anthology of music recorded at home by members of London's experimental music community. All this performance I made for Trinity Laban's Tunes at Home series. Here, I adapted elements of my practice as an improvising musician. In a venue, I can assume the sound I make is the focus of the attention of those who can hear it. In a domestic situation, this changes. One has to be considerate of one's neighbours, and anyway, the sudden cessation of activity, including such ambient noise as traffic, made me feel more acutely aware of noise. Volume immediately became lower. Being in my own living room, broadcasting to others' living rooms, brought an intimacy to proceedings. I felt both vulnerable and isolated. I think the tension in this comes through in this performance. Overnight, I and my work colleagues were forced to adjust to entirely remote working, and the whole TL community had to work out what it meant to be a creative community when the social interaction that's normally the bedrock of our work is removed. It seemed to me that the entire world had enacted a trauma on a massive scale that perversely embodied precisely the kind of atmospheric transformations that I've been exploring in my own work. But now, rather than creating carefully curated situations, I, along with everyone else, was forced into a sudden and traumatic reconfiguration with my own life and environment. There's a tradition stemming from Cage of the sound in itself, but all sound mediated through human ears becomes political, a fact exposed by the pandemic. The sound environment suddenly changed, and this shift of oral experience was very clearly a product of the events unfolding, the structures and atmospheres of our society and the influence they bring to bear on what we hear exposed. To hear sound without regard for these underlying significances is an act of privilege. This is reflected in sounds that I and others began to make at home. An environment that was once a site of private practice and experimentation now acquired a new role as a site of performance, the domestic and the professional worlds enjoyed. The makeshift nature of these domestic recordings, made with whatever equipment was to hand, often overlaid with a patina of background noise, began to create a particular aesthetic of home performance and recording. Moreover, the ideas of liveness that we've built up over the past century began to dissolve as a new conception of online co-presence began to assert itself. A form of remotely assembled ensemble performance emerged, faces tiled in the style of a Zoom call. Latency and lag make live remote coordination more or less impossible. These were an accumulation of home recordings edited together to produce the final result. Anecdotal evidence suggests many viewers took these videos at face value, choirs performing together live online. I became fascinated by the conductors, the performance of a redundant role. Was this an expression of community, assertion of authority or power? Outside the home, for those of us lucky enough to have access to open spaces in which to take our rationed exercise, the atmosphere was transformed as traffic and other such noises ceased almost entirely. The constant low drone of human activity dissipated, and other sounds began to reassert themselves, especially birdsong, which suddenly seemed a far more present and pervasive sound in the lockdown world. Human mechanical noise became a rarity, and in the greater stretches of time between, say, traffic noises impinging on the ear, made time seem to proceed in a more fluid way, a phenomenon I attempted to convey through this manipulated field recording. This is a remix made from 3 of the tracks for the Linear Obsessional compilation I contributed to in April. It was released on the follow-up release, Self-Isolating Congregation. Making this felt like, if not exactly a collaboration, like a creative endeavour, at least tangentially connected to other people. This was perhaps the seed of an idea. These were activities that would have been simple normally, but the stress of remote working, the exhausting and seemingly never-ending cycle of video meetings was affecting my concentration. Some of these projects would wither, others would see completion only after an extended period of time. Meanwhile, as well as the sounds of nature reasserting themselves, other sounds began to permeate our lives. The clap for NHS workers began as a gesture of gratitude and initially gave a sense of coming together as neighbours stood on their doorsteps and waved and shouted at each other over the road. As time went on, however, this act became increasingly tinged with frustration and sense of meaningless performativity. by now, we were starting to go a bit mad.
Why not dress up? Why not dress up? Why not dress up?
This is a track I made for a compilation in aid of the mental health charity Calm. It samples recordings by the bassoonist Emily Hawkmark.
Why not dress up?
By now, there was no future, no change, just an endless now stretching infinitely in all directions. Why not dress up?
Why not dress up?
I also started to hatch a plan of a series of remote duets. I recorded myself improvising, put these recordings online, and started to invite friends to make their own recordings to go with them. The idea was that when these arrived, I'd pair them not with my recordings, but each other, taking myself out of the final recording. This is Boscombe Park. In September, returning from Wales refreshed and enthused, I spent a week visiting it and recording the sounds in it, anticipating the start of a new creative project. This led nowhere. On my wanderings on my bike, I discovered what I came to think of as a found installation, an underpass built on metal, which resonated as the traffic passed overhead. This was a truly liminal space, a place to pass through unless you were homeless or a sound artist documenting it. I photographed and recorded, intending to use this documentation to create a piece, but increasingly wondered what I could add to this space. It was neglected, dirty, graffiti-covered and strangely beautiful and captivating. I felt that it was enough to notice this place's existence and to spend time in it, contemplating its existence and the forces that had brought it to be. This is a live performance I conducted with the clarinetist Emily Suzanne Shapiro at the 100 Years Gallery in October, during a brief period when such gatherings were permitted. We performed live on Zoom, using our instruments and pre-recorded versions of ourselves. The result was a collage of real-time, co-present performance, reaction to mediatised versions of ourselves, and the echoes of latency exposed in a live atmosphere. Carry on doing things you enjoy. If we're feeling worried, anxious, lonely or low, we may stop doing things we usually enjoy. Make an effort to focus on your favourite hobby if it is something you can still do at home. Start a new hobby. Read, write, do crosswords or jigsaws. Try drawing and painting. Whatever it is, find something that works for you. If you cannot think of anything you like doing, try learning something new at home. There are lots of free tutorials and courses online. You can still stay social at home by joining others online. Book clubs, pub quizzes and music concerts are just a few of the things to try. 9. Take time to relax. This can help with difficult emotions in your lives and improve our well-being. Relaxation techniques can also help deal with feelings of anxiety. This is a track from 50 Breaths, a compilation of field recordings I made that last as long as 50 breaths. I took this idea from The River at Night, a graphic novel by Kevin Huizenga. This one was made on the 23rd of November. This is the Toxteth Day of the Dead, a day in which the justified ancients of Mimu had bricks fired with the ashes of the dead to a pyramid. This year is Tupaki. This is the first match I received in my duets project. It sounded nothing like anything I'd expected to come out of the idea, which made me like it all the more. It felt like this project might work after all. This is an experiment in real-time ensemble singing on Zoom and High Fidelity, an online spatial audio environment. This will be a collection of tracks composed in such a way that they form a potentially infinite duration, blurring the boundary between drone as event and drone as object, an installation for the domestic